Welcome to the Hay Kings podcast, brought to you by Crone, dedicated to hay and forage producers. On this episode, I'm joined by Jeff Jackson with Cropland. Now, I'm working in a dryland condition. I don't have any irrigation available to me.
Correct.
And we haven't touched on Roundup Ready and low lignin and some of these GMO traits. Last year, I used Roundup Ready alfalfa, and I told you that we had good soil moisture to start with, and then 3/4 of an inch of rain 2 weeks later, and then it didn't rain again until this was the first week in May when I was planting, and it didn't rain again until the last day of August. Not a drop. I could
That's
lay
a true story.
True story. I could lay hay down with immunity from rain. There was nothing that I could do to get rain to fall. No matter how many hundreds of acres of hay I laid down, it didn't rain. And you got me like, this is where we get internally conflicted as hay guys. I'm watching my new seeding alfalfa that's 90 acres burn up and making not enough hay because it didn't rain, right?
Correct.
So like it was a rough situation. But I was really, really glad that I used that Roundup Ready trait. Now, if you have irrigation, there's lots of options, right? If you have irrigation, it's a completely different world. But in our dry land, where you don't know if it's going to rain, you do not want weeds competing against your alfalfa.
And they will grow with less moisture than your crop does. Guaranteed every time, no question.
Yep. So I read the label on the Roundup, and I read the label on the sack carefully, and it said the third trifoliate leaf. You can go out there and spray, and I did. Now, if you're new to the Roundup Ready world, don't be afraid. I can't see the tracks from the sprayer. The alfalfa will be just fine.
And I will also tell you that the recommendations when all those technologies came out were third trifoliate, and we've actually kind of twisted that a touch now, that when the weeds need to be taken care of,
hit them.
They can get ahead of the growth stage of the alfalfa. And to be quite upfront about it, that alfalfa is glyphosate tolerant to a high level that I haven't seen any problems. As soon as those cotyledons come out of the ground, I mean, you've got a glyphosate tolerant plant as soon as it germinates, but literally if the weeds get that far ahead of you, they're easier to kill and they're small. So don't wait for the alfalfa to catch up and let the weeds get too big.
Sure.
Absolutely.
Well,
to your point,
that's good.
Wheel tracks don't seem to be an issue. Really.
That was the third field of because I'm putting Roundup Ready in known weed infestations too.
Correct.
That's one of my management strategies. I know that if I put conventional alfalfa into some of these fields where I know I have bugless and knapweed and vetch and things that'll never get out, right? If I know that I'm taking on somebody else's problem, Roundup Ready is a great tool. So I've done this. That was my third seeding of Roundup Ready. And at no point have I ever seen spray tracks later. So you don't have to worry about that sprayer damaging, or the tractor and sprayer damaging the alfalfa crop.
That's right. And I'm down here near Kansas City, Missouri, where this is very close to the epicenter of glyphosate tolerance on weeds. And I still use Roundup Ready alfalfa myself on my own farm. And part of it is I can do a pre with some glyphosate to control some of those hard to handle broadleaves that are starting out in my establishment year. And usually once you get a good stand established, the broadleaf population doesn't bother us too much. And the great thing about it is I can come in the fall. So I'm in one of these worlds where this little purple henbit comes up everywhere and looks like a purple carpet across every farm field this time of year. And I can go make an application in the fall after last cut, somewhere about the time about first hard frost, and get all those winter biennial weeds are gone. The mustards, the pennycrest, the shepherd's purse, the henbit, any other perennial weeds, thistles,
Yeah.
Grasses are all kept out. So it works out really, really nice from that standpoint.
And I'm going to give some examples of the first time I used Roundup Ready. I was going into Canadian thistle and quackgrass.
Oh.
Uh-huh. Yep. Both of those grow from any chunk or piece of the plant. Both of those have extremely active root systems. And where I found the most success was just the 3 days after the first frost in the fall. You go out there with a shot of Roundup, and they are no more.
Gone. Yeah, absolutely takes care of the problem. That's a good piece because that is a good establishment technique or tool. And I would say that, folks, we kind of got away from using the old yellows, the dinitroanilins, the old Treflan. We kind of went away from that for a while, and we're starting to see that they're really good to use again as a pre-plant incorporated, especially for some of those tougher to control broadleaves. But you kind of need a little moisture to get that activated as well. So there's always that what if and could have been or should have been, but don't be afraid to start using a few more of those pre-plant incorporated herbicides again as well to get that first good establishment out of the way.
Yep. And so we did some of that last year too. Now it was 2 weeks later. So I helped the neighbor as he was out spraying and I was running the incorporation. The spots where we ran out of herbicide, you could see the damage where those weeds were able to compete with the alfalfa in a low rainfall situation. It was a problem. It was a real problem. And in my field, in my Roundup Ready field, I had a couple of little triangles that I missed with the sprayer as I was making my turns on the ends of the fields. There is no alfalfa there because the weeds outcompeted the alfalfa in that establishment year. In a dry scenario, you can't have that weed competition.
Yeah, and I wanted to comment on that quick too, because there are a number of people, right, wrong, or indifferent. We all have our own tactics and methods. But for the guy that says, you know what, we always just have to choke through those weeds on the first year and then it's fine. And we're just not going to do much. We're going to go let them grow. We're going to clip it, take what we get. You have to remember also that much like people with livestock, if you have a newborn calf and you neglect it and you don't take care of it for the first 45 or 60 days and it gets pneumonia and gets sick,
that calf
they can kind of get over it, but the scar's already there, right? They never catch up with the rest of the pen of calves. And an alfalfa plant, you have to view that way, is that anything negative that happens in the first 45 to 60 days of that plant's life can impact your yield potential for the life of the stand. So keeping it as weed-free as you can, protecting it from competition. And that leads me to, we're just talking about weeds right now because we got into this glyphosate tolerant alfalfa piece, but that also leads me back to the comment, John, we did not talk about companion crops with alfalfa.
Out of the question in my mind.
And that is
completely out of the question.
It is.
I will never do a companion crop with alfalfa.
And part of the reason you will never do that is because you can't handle the competition in a dry environment for that plant to compete with your intended crop.
Correct.
To take the moisture away. But we still have a significant number of people that will sit in a room with myself and we'll have that discussion. And at the end of the day, if you have enough moisture in your system and you need something to stabilize the soil, I'll give you the caveat. I like guys that are using it for soil stabilization because we have windy areas. We have water erosion on side hills, wind erosion. But I tell them as soon as it's as tall as my pop can, it's dead. And they cringe and look at me and go, why would I put oats out there if I'm going to kill them? Well, the only way it really works is if you have overabundance of moisture or you can irrigate through it.
Yep.
Like the guys that are telling me that they're going to take it in the soft dough stage and chop oats for feed or make hay, it gives me a little heartburn because I know what it's done to that alfalfa plant for the next 5 years of production. So they're great for soil stabilization. I try to talk to guys into planting like 25 pounds or less than 30 so we can stabilize the dirt. But don't plant 3 bushels and expect to have a good alfalfa stand because I can tell you what, that does not fall into my category of proper management practices for replant dollars.
Mm-hmm.
It's tough, but we have a lot of cover crops. And then, so we varied from oats, and we have people talking about barley and wheat and other things. I'm still going to stand fast that I don't want very much planted just to stabilize the soil, and let's get rid of it. Don't try to use, I really struggle with trying to use something as a full crop on top of alfalfa because I know the negative.
Mm-hmm.
I don't see the benefit.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm with you. I really am, but I have to be nice to everybody else right now.
Right. Now, just a reminder, I'm in the West and it's dry land. I mean, it's a very different situation where we don't get rain through the summer, so we just have no capacity to support that. It is not the Midwest.
And I think a lot of guys know what their capacity is, but they still get a little bit blinded by the fact that they can't take a forage crop off for 45 days, and they know that oats will make it.
Mm-hmm.
So just be cautious about that. Study the weather systems, know what's going on. Take care of yourself. It just pains me when we go through all the work, and as you said, you put some expensive alfalfa seed out there, and I'm going to be the first one to say it. It's not the cheapest crop to get planted.
Nope.
And then you start throwing a trait or two traits in there, and it really pinches. So let's not do anything that's going to give us the opportunity for failure, period. That's my point. So,
yep.
Let's take a break there and we'll get a word from our sponsor.
Livestock prefer palatable hay, and great bales require two things: high-quality crop and superior harvesting tools. Krone has you covered with the most reliable equipment so you can focus on the crop. Start your season with an added sense of security when you buy a new Krone. Now through May 31st, when you buy a new Krone mower, tedder, or rake, you can turn 1 year of warranty into 2 for free. See your local Krone dealer for details. All right, let's go over to seed selection and winter hardiness, fall dormancy.
oh my gosh.
I'm hearing a lot of folks going backwards on fall dormancy, going to lower fall dormancies in my neck of the woods because the regrowth is too fast for hay production. Where they're getting into trouble, you get one rainstorm on your hay and it sets out another 3 or 4 or 5 days. And in that 3 or 4 or 5 days, you got 6 inches of regrowth on a fall dormancy 5 where you didn't on a fall dormancy 4.
Yes. So variety selection is a huge thing. And fall dormancies is part of my criteria. Yes. When people are asking, hey, Jeff, what should I plant? So part of it is, John, what's the end goal? Yeah. Are you trying to do dry hay? Are you doing dry hay with fewer people that might take a while? Are you doing dry hay with fewer people and maybe have more breakdowns than a guy with a newer line of equipment? All those things impact how fast you can get things done. And so to your point, and you know how I think people get pushed into higher fall dormancies than what they really need at times is you look over the fence and Farmer Jones's alfalfa is greened up a little bit faster than yours, and you go, hey, that looks beautiful, and mine doesn't look so good yet today. I think I want to do what he's doing.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And then you get a little ahead of yourself because I'll be honest. This is one of my fun stories. Is I'm the forage agronomist, and I move into a neighborhood in South Dakota, and I'm gonna raise alfalfa amongst everybody else and show them how to do it, right? Because that's what I do. It's my job, just to raise high quality alfalfa and do a lot of it. So I plant a fall dormancy 5 and try to do small square bales of dry hay in a humid environment. So guess who has it's just like having an electrician that's got a burnt out light bulb or no light switch in the house, right? You take care of your own last or you look like the worst. Anyway, it's one of those stories where, again, I had a couple rain showers like you're talking, and before I got it out of the field, I'd flipped it twice and had a yellow streak 8 feet wide. And the regrowth was probably all of 8 inches by the time it got baled. And I basically just had a neighbor with a round baler. I said, turn the moisture sensor off
and go bale.
Remove the junk from my field.
Yep.
So fall dormancy is a big deal. And the biggest part of it is, yes, how are you going to harvest that hay? If you're doing haylage or baleage in some parts of the world, put in a 4 or 5 and let her rip, tater chip, but you get shorter growing conditions and trying to do dry hay. Paying attention to fall dormancy is a big deal. And for those of you that don't really know what fall dormancy is, it's basically the characteristic of that plant to have extra growth in the fall. The higher the number, the more fall growth it gets after a September 1st cutting, technically, or somewhere near that type of story. So a 5 will have the longest growth period in the fall. A 4 will be a little bit less, and a fall will be just a touch less than that. And in the spring, when they break dormancy, the 5 will generally break first. The 4 will be a little slower to wake up, and the fall dormancy 3 will be the last one to wake up. And subsequently, to your comment, when you cut them, the fall dormancy 5 will have a faster regrowth that it sometimes can chase you out of the field and make you a little bit unhappy, because now you're driving around on all that growth and you got to start them all over.
Yep.
So
now again, in a silage application, perfect.
Awesome. Love it.
Just go. In a dry hay, maybe back off one notch, right? And then
Yes.
the winter hardiness, and this is something that I focus on a lot because I've had that very first Roundup Ready field that I put in, a third of it winter killed on year 2. So I focus a lot on winter hardiness.
Winter hardiness has changed a lot in the last couple decades because fall dormancy and winter hardiness used to be tied very closely together, and you had to plant a lower fall dormancy rating, like a 3 or a 2, if you were that far north, so that they would survive the winters. And the breeders did a great job of what they call bending, and they've kind of broke those two apart now. So today, John Paul, some of the best winter hardiness ratings you'll see in the industry, and the lowest numbers the best, I've seen some at 1.1 and 1.2. And that's probably the best winter hardiness I've seen across the industry. Today, we have fall dormancy 5s that can have a winter hardiness rating of 1.2.
Wow.
So they have increased through the genetic selections and breeding and screening. They are very, very winter tolerant for a variety that we might traditionally plant down in southern Nebraska or Kansas. So they've done a really good job of that. You won't experience the best. I don't want to say the best. You won't gain any advantage of taking a 5 all the way to Canada, but you could.
Right. Again, in those silage situations, those kind of things. Yeah.
Yes. And then you get what really dings us today more than anything. So I kind of even quit talking about winter hardiness ratings because the screenings are so good on them today. But inherently, if you are really dry and go into some poor winter conditions or get ice or some ponding or things like that, nothing's going to save you. So winter kill is winter kill at that point.
Right.
Doesn't matter what the rating is. They don't live underwater or under ice.
Yep.
So a couple of those pieces in there. So from a variety selection standpoint, what else did you rattle off? There was about 5 things. And I went, oh yeah, we could talk about that.
Yeah. So I'm thinking about fall dormancy, winter hardiness. I'm thinking about, the low lignin traits was another thing that we could talk about.
Low lignin, reduced lignin. So again, that's another trait, the Harvextra trait in the industry today. So how does that help a guy? When we started this whole program, a group of fancy, smart guys got together and said, alfalfa is a great crop, but what can we do to make it more useful and better for the livestock? And they said, what if we reduce the amount of lignin in it and made it more digestible? That's a good idea. Let's try it. So through some genetic marker-assisted breeding and some background, they figured out how to downregulate the gene that produces lignin. And lignin is basically an undigestible compound that kind of encapsulates or wraps itself around the fiber in the stem.
I mean, lignin is what makes trees woody.
Yes, trees are highly lignified, if you want to think about it. So if we did not have lignin in a plant, they would lay prostrate versus growing vertical.
So we have to have some.
So these guys messed around for a number of years in the labs and in the fields. And so they figured out, kind of like your dimmer switch in the house, instead of taking the light switch and flipping it on or off, which we know that's not feasible, they figured out how to take the dimmer switch and turn it down just a little bit, to the point where now when we do an RFQ test, let's say, you might have 10 to 12, 15 points higher RFQ, because that measures fiber digestibility in a Harvextra type versus a non-Harvextra planted side by side.
Let's take a break there and we'll get a word from our sponsor.
What's up, Hey Kings? You have a lot of choices when it comes to sourcing your equipment parts, but have you tried Messick's? We have $20 million in equipment parts on our shelves, and we pick up from C&H Parts Depots daily. All this inventory is available with same-day shipping with no upcharges or expediting fees. Messick's.com has exclusive features like transparent pricing, photos of parts, fit verification, alternative part options, and an obsolete part search tool alongside the manufacturer's drawings so you're not guessing at what you need. We cover all the top brands, including New Holland, Case IH, Kubota, Krone, and Peckway, and more, all from our website. Our online tools are backed by 60-plus parts professionals who are just a call away, ready to find even the most obscure parts. So whether you're a seasoned farmer or a weekend enthusiast, think Messick's for a convenient and professional part shopping experience. Visit us at Messick's.com or call our parts hotline at 877-260-3528.
Messick's, a helping hand with your land.
I'm going to get on my soapbox here for just a second and say RFQ includes fiber digestibility. RFV does not.
Correct. And everybody needs to understand that concept very clearly, because I've had growers that planted Harvextra alfalfa with that beautiful trait in there and called me back and said, man, buddy, I don't believe you. I got my tests back today and the RFV, the test numbers are the same. And I said, well, how much did your test cost? $14.50. No, then you did not get the test that measures fiber digestibility. Go back to the drawing board, take another sample, send in an RFQ test. It should cost you $26 to $30, and you'll get the difference between Harvextra and conventional with that test. Because literally RFV, if we're just measuring fiber, they both produce the same amount of fiber. This one is more available for digestibility than the other.
I think that's a big part of where the forage industry is headed, is a focus on fiber digestibility. Certainly, as I talk to my Australian friends, they're really focusing on that fiber digestibility component. And as we're talking about dairy rations in the U.S., that fiber digestibility is critical.
And if you are in the commercial hay market and you have a market where you can market on quality with the digestibility parameter included, and you're 12 points higher, what does that do to your price per ton? It should inherently raise your price by $12 to $15 or more.
And if it doesn't, it might be a saleability. So in a poor market condition, it might not get you additional money, but it might generate cash flow.
It might just be the kick you over the top. Absolutely. And the cows will tell you. I have a certain number of people that I talk to, and they're like, yeah, I don't even test my hay anymore. I'm so good at just looking at it. I'm like, well, that's cool. Good for you. No, I know, but they're out there. And they'll say, well, how did the cows respond at the dairy when you delivered it? Well, they called and told me they wanted every bale out of that lot from that field, and they'd take it all. Or even dairymen that would tell me today that they've tested their Harvextra hay and thought that the sample was a little bit lower than they expected. And when they fed it, the cows said, yes, it's as good as it should be. So the digestibility trait's there. And so that's one thing. We decided that was pretty cool, and we chased that for a minute. And then we realized that, you know what? If we took Harvextra and conventional alfalfa and we cut them on the same day, the Harvextra should be higher quality. But what if we took that Harvextra variety and cut it like 5 days later? So you want to harvest let's say you want to harvest your conventional alfalfa at 160 RFQ. The dairies really like it in that 160, 170 range. Most of the Midwest dairies do. And if you take your Harvextra too early, it's higher quality than it needs to be. So why don't we just let it grow for another 4 or 5 days? And in 4 or 5 days, it'll be the same quality that the other one was cut early.
With higher tonnage.
Yeah, over that 5-day period, maybe we get 120, 130, 150 pounds a day extra dry matter. And for some of these environments where you have the ability to take 5 or 6 cuttings, if you extend every one of those by 5 days, maybe you've taken a whole cutting out and now you cut only 5 times or only 4 times versus 5 or 6. So every harvest cost, every trip, every pass with compaction and crown damage and all of those things, the studies will all tell you that if you can let that alfalfa grow just a longer between cuttings, it's healthier for the plant. You should yield more. And oh, by gosh, if it's healthier and more persistent, what does that do to your overall bottom line expense? It helps push it out another year.
Yep.
So lots of benefits to that trait. Is it for everybody? Nope. The people using it today tickled with it? Absolutely. So it's a great option. And that's what this is all about in our world today, right? It's having choices, and there's some different things to choose from. So I love it.
we need to back up a little bit because we haven't done a good job talking about non-dormant varieties. We've spent a lot of time talking about dormant varieties. And we're talking about that fall dormancy rating where there are some varieties of alfalfa that don't go dormant.
So literally you hit 6 and you're kind of a semi-dormant at a fall dormancy 6, and then you go 7, 8, 9, 10. Might even be an 11. But most of what I see is about in the 8 range. But again, to your point, some of those varieties really don't go dormant. They can't handle those cold temperatures nearly as well. And so then they don't even get a winter hardiness rating past 6 because now, interestingly enough, I had a guy in Minnesota plant some fall dormancy 8 one year, hoping that it would die. And he chuckled the next spring and said, that actually wintered better than some of my regular varieties did. Because he wanted to do green plow down manure and it didn't quite work the way he wanted. So he had to kill it anyways. But we do have, non-dormant varieties for people. And I would call that, you go more of the coastal alfalfa, right? So you're going to probably be maybe even Oregon, but California, Arizona, New Mexico, down through there. Yes. And again, I spent so much time in the Midwest and the high plains that we start talking non-dormants and I go, yep, they're there. What else do I know?
Exist.
Not a darn thing. They grow their alfalfa. They need fertilizer the same. They have the same bugs.
And usually they non-dormant varieties are grown under irrigation. So it's just a completely different world.
Yeah, you don't hardly find a non-dormant without irrigation because it's just that type of environment for sure.
Yep. Okay, we check the box on non-dormant. Okay. Let's do an exercise where we go through and pick my variety. We've just spent but this is the conversation that you have all the time.
Absolutely.
You understand that I'm going to dry hay. You understand that I'm in South Canada. Rather, I'm in Washington State.
Exactly. Canada South.
I'm not in the irrigated Columbia Basin. I'm in the cold spot. You understand that I have weed pressure because I'm cleaning up other people's messes. My harvest windows vary because it rains till about the 4th of July, usually, not last year, but usually. And then after that, we're good till about the 1st of September.
And then you need one more tidbit for me. Are you going to go into a weed infested patch or something that's not weedy?
Well, this one's going to be weedy.
So you almost described to a T a fall dormancy 3 Harvextra variety. Because you have, with Harvextra, you have glyphosate, you have the high quality for your commercial sales market where you can get the quality parameters, or you let it go a few days and you take a wider harvest window. But the fall dormancy 3 hits your doing dry baled hay in that environment. You've already experienced a higher fall dormancy, like a 5 that in your area that isn't conducive for that. So,
well, even a 4 doesn't work good for us.
Again, so the funny thing is you did such a good job of explaining what your environment looks like. I didn't have to ask all the questions to get there, but that's usually what I will do with folks is start with the very basics and say, what's your end game? First, I want to know your end market. Are you going to feed it yourself or are you going to sell it? Then I need to know, the fall dormancy piece or how you're going to get it baled. Is it going to be dry hay? Do you have the ability to do wet hay the first cut or two and then dry hay later in the season? So it all matters. It's not just as simple as walking into the seed shed and going, hey, Joe, I need some bags of alfalfa today. What's on the shelf? There's actually a process that should be followed for everybody to have the best success, because just like any other seed crop, I could take the very best variety in somebody else's mind and it would be the worst thing for you as an experience, or vice versa. So having that discussion is pretty important. Absolutely. And then finding out, again, knowing that you're in an environment that maybe doesn't have the same disease challenges as someone else, or we have potato leafhopper varieties in the world. Some people might get hammered by potato leafhoppers, other might not. Well, then we might market them a potato leafhopper tolerant variety so they're not making a trip to the chem shed every week. So,
well, and we also didn't talk, we actually have cutworms.
Oh,
we have cutworms that we have to. Oh, yeah. Cutworms are a thing for us. And if you don't know what cutworms are, just imagine all of your alfalfa getting up past that cotyledon, those 2 little cotyledon leaves, and just putting up a stem. And then one night bugs come out and mow everything off and it's all done and dead. And everything's over, but the tears.
At that point, you're not a perennial plant. It's just over.
Yep. Yep.
Yeah.
It's all done and over. So we're putting down insecticides very, very shortly after planting.
Yes. Interesting.
And I mean, before that plant emerges, we're putting down insecticides just to get it through, because once that plant is up and going and has a crown established, cutworms aren't a problem anymore. But for us, cutworms.
That's an interesting one. And then we have fall armyworms in different parts of the world. So understanding how to manage around those.
Same concept.
Yeah.
Where they come out and just march across the field.
Yep.
This is why they're called armyworms.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, variety selection, to your point, is kind of a big deal between fall dormancy, traits, how you're going to use that. Because yeah, there could be 5 different Roundup Readies, 5 different Harv Extras, 10 different conventionals, and you got 20 to choose from in one guy's seed guide. So yeah, it could be a tough one. Or salt tolerance. There's those things to consider at times. So it's all out there. But
lots of options.
Absolutely. So we get through all those kind of things, and then it's on to regular in-season crop management. But yeah, getting a stand started correctly, it's kind of a big deal.
Now, let's briefly talk about the implications. And I think about the financial side of this.
Yes.
And especially with high interest rates. And it's funny to think about interest rates mattering in alfalfa planting.
Oh.
But it's time value of money. The quicker that you can get a return on that, the lower the interest expense.
Correct.
So as I think about planting my Roundup Ready variety, one of the benefits is I have a clean stand year one.
Yes.
And even though we had no rain and we didn't have a cutting, right? We were able to come back after that August rainstorm, and we got a flush of growth, and we were able to take a small cutting of silage, alfalfa haylage, and I'm able to convert it to cash in year one.
Yes.
There's a lot of economic value in being able to have a high quality crop in year one versus waiting until year 2 or 3 before you have all the weeds cleaned up.
There's so much to that. And then again, I have one of those experiences too, where I did the first time in my life, I've done a fall seeded alfalfa crop following small grain, and then coming in the spring of 2023 and being able to cut that thing 4 times right away the first year was just, so to your point,
that's cash flow.
Take the expense that you put out there and get it taken care of as quick as you can so you can utilize those assets in other ways.
Yep, absolutely. The faster you get your money back, the better. And then the cost of a failure is, especially with alfalfa, if you get to that year 3 and 4 and you're not happy with it, well, then instead of getting, 3 cuttings a year, you're only getting, in that case, year 3 and 4 and decide that you need to replant. Well, you only got half as many cuttings as you should have got out of that seeding cost.
Yes.
That means your establishment cost per ton that you've sold just doubled.
And I will tell you,
that makes a huge difference.
Maybe other people have better luck than I'm going to call it luck today, but maybe their operation runs differently. But it seems to me like every time I tell myself it won't matter, that's good enough. Within 90 or 120 days, I'm telling myself, oh, you're such a fool. Another day, another 6 hours to get that prep right or the seed right, or instead of saying, well, I'm going to do it on Sunday versus Monday, and I went and grabbed some stuff at the farm store versus a dealer with better varieties. All those goofy little things can just come back to haunt you. And to your point, man, the time value of money and what that sets you back, or you cut corners and have to replant and pay for part of that seed, or your fuel and planting time again, maybe your seed's covered, but the rest of it still costs you.
If you get to that year 3 and 4 and you're not happy with it, well, then you have autotoxicity that you have to deal with, and you can't go back into alfalfa.
No, right.
So maybe you have to go into a rotation crop that's not profitable.
Right. So,
I mean, that actually is our problem.
It is.
I'm just not any good at growing my rotation crops. My oats and barley always turn out like garbage. And I just don't have all the right stuff to do it perfect. Generally speaking, those rotation crops for me are not profitable.
Right.
So then I have to eat it for a year or 2
Yes.
before I can go back into alfalfa.
The high value forage,
it is exceptionally expensive for me to screw up.
Absolutely. And And I'm going to go back to that again too. For those people that are paying close attention to that on this whole rotation thing, when you go through extreme stress, whether it's extreme drought stress, extreme weed pressure, which impose drought stress and competition, those are probably the two biggest ones, but the data would suggest that those stands might not be as productive as you're expecting. And then again, to your point, you're going to shorten that rotation and be back to another rotation crop quicker than you want to be. But keep that in mind. Sometimes the drought thing you can't really fix. It's just the way it happens. But just keep in the back of your mind that that might be a lower yielding field for the entire life of the stand because it was so dry when it was a seedling and it never got to fully get its, I don't know, whatever you want to call it, its energy or its vigor, and it's not going to be the same.
I suspect, I mean, maybe I'll have that problem with my field that I planted last year. And it's just, I did everything except, I did everything right except drilling it in a dry condition.
Hindsight's 100%.
Yep. And again, the highlights are get a good, well-prepared, firm seed bed to go into, and then decide how you're going to plant it. Most anything will work if you have rain coming in the near future, and continued rain coming in the near future. But if you're going into a dry condition, consider a drill. Consider something that's going to get that seed placement correct. Don't forget that you have some options on some traits, whether it's Roundup Ready or Harv Extra. Those exist, and they can help you manage your harvest schedules, your weed problems. Again, my situation, I'm just going in and cleaning up terrible weedy messes.
Right.
And I find that Roundup Ready is an excellent tool going into a known weed problem.
Yep.
And then we have to think about all those other traits and varieties and tolerances and pest resistance. So there's a lot to this. And then just don't beat yourself up when you do make a mistake, because you will. You absolutely will make a mistake somewhere along the way, but try to avoid it, because especially as interest rates and with higher interest rates, that time value of money component becomes larger and larger. And we're not talking about pennies per acre. We're talking about dollars and tens of dollars per acre in time value of money that really, really adds up and is the difference between being profitable and not.
Yes, absolutely. So yeah, we can't get by with just kind of haphazardly calling it farming for recreation anymore. It's a business.
Absolutely.
Yes. Well, thank you for your time today, John. That's fun to get to sit and talk about some of those near and dear things that really make my world fun, or maybe some days not so fun.
Well, and in all fairness, we had a lot of discussion about my particular operation where there was a lot of adverse conditions.
Yeah.
And there's a lot more forgiving places to try to establish stands, especially with irrigation, but I think my situation, especially in talking about drought, if we get into a dry condition with this warm spring, well, rather, it's been relatively warm all winter across the entire U.S.
For sure.
That's not really the condition that we want. We talked about lots of different things to think about if you're going into adverse conditions.
Yep, absolutely. And to your point, it seems like no matter which little micro environment or geography that you're in, there's going to be one challenge or another. You're faced with dry conditions. The next guy might be faced with, again, like you said,
floating away or disease or
too much rain. Alfalfa weevils are hatching all over the country down here. So yeah, it's just a different stress load for you. Yeah. But we all have to be absolutely thinking about what's going on.
The last thing I have to say is I am going to plant a cropland variety this year.
Well, and I think we just determined that it needs to be a cropland Harv Extra variety, fall dormancy 3.
With the best winter hardiness available in a fall dormancy 3. That's exactly where we're
and some good disease tolerance. Even though it's dry, plant health is still important.
Right. And that's probably somewhere where I need to get better, is learning about the diseases and being more aware of that. As far as bugs, there's only one that really catches my mind, and that's those
your cutworms.
Cutworms, absolutely. But maybe I'm missing the boat on this by not going out there with a net and doing sweeps. Or we didn't really talk about what a successful stand looks like. We just talked about the challenges, but I think that that's all right.
Absolutely.
We want to see 30 plants per square foot.
30 would be a really good first catch, yes. And by the end of the fall, you probably need to be 20 or better. And the first year, 15 would be perfect. Those numbers seem small, but really it's going to thin out on its own based on what it can support on that acre anyway. So yes.
Well, with that, I'll say thanks, Jeff.
Absolutely.
This has been a wonderful conversation.
Well, thank you, everybody. I hope it treats you well and you go get a good alfalfa seedling establishment taken care of this year, and we can talk about how cool it was later.
Thank you again for Cropland putting some money towards sponsoring the Hay Kings podcast. That's really what makes all of this possible. Thank you to our new sponsor, Krone. And for more information, visit Krone-NA. That's Krone North America. Krone-NA.com. Thank you to Nick Palmieri at Palmieri Sound for doing all of our audio editing. Without him, this wouldn't be possible, and the audio quality would be terrible. So thank you, Nick. And thank you to Jessica Palmieri for doing all of our social media coordination.